Cook Italian. I'm your host, Kenny Palazzalo, and today we're in beautiful Plum Island in Newbury, Massachusetts. And today I'm going to be cooking at my cousin's house, the Warriors. And I'm going to be cooking what everybody asks. That one question: what do you put in your meatballs? Well, today you're about to find out. Come join me. Hi everybody, welcome to Meatballs 101. And let me say this, everybody makes their meatballs differently. My father, he doesn't use any veal. My mother, she doesn't use any beef. Her meatballs are all veal and pork. You know, depending on where you came from in Italy, is depending on how you cook your meatballs. I fry them in olive oil. My father broils them. Some people bake them. A lot of different ways to make meatballs. The best meatball, that remains to be seen. But I'm gonna give it to you the way I make mine. And I make them a little bit of both. I took my dad's recipe, took my mother's recipe, took my grandmother's recipe, and I kind of made my own meatball. So today, you're getting the Live, Laugh, and Cook Italian meatball. We start off with a tri-mix. This is a ground pork, beef, and veal. I buy it this way. They call it a meatball or a meatloaf mix. It's usually the best way. I'm gonna give you the ingredients list. You got a half a cup of grated cheese. You got 3 eggs scrambled. You got a half a cup of seasoned Italian breadcrumbs. You got a half a cup of very fine chopped parsley. You got 2 teaspoons of salt, a half a teaspoon of pepper. This is 5 pieces of white bread with the crust cut off. We're gonna get to that in a little bit. And then I have a dozen cloves of garlic. And everybody does their garlic differently. Some people put it through that masher, other people grate it with a cheese grater. I use this dish. This dish, these people, they came from Minnesota. They come to the feast. They sell all these ceramics. And they sold these garlic dishes. And, you know, they came for a few years, and every time I walked by, a guy was doing a demonstration. And I always said to him, you know, garlic's garlic. Well, one day, he gave me one of these dishes. He goes, listen, he says, you're chairman of the feast. He goes, I want you to take this home and try it. Well, let me tell you, I took that garlic grating dish home, right? And I grated that garlic for the first time, and I put it in a shrimp scampi, and people said, what's in here? I go, what do you mean what's in it? It's garlic. They go, no, it's gotta be a special garlic. I went, it's not a special garlic. I go, it's this dish. When you grate the garlic in this dish, it turns into a mush. I mean, everything grates it, rices it, but the mush that comes out of this plate, it does something, all right? So, these 12 cloves of garlic, I'm gonna smash them down, and of course it leaves that skin, which you don't want, right? So it gives you all the meat and does away with the skin, right? And you just get it into this paste. You know, nothing really puts it into that paste the way this dish does. I mean, when you run it through the cheese grater, it's grated and finely done, but it's not mush. This mush, I'll tell you what, there's something to be said about this mush. I can't say enough about it. So, if you can, find yourself one of these garlic grating dishes, I would suggest you do so. All right, and like I said, it's 12 cloves of garlic. I'm probably gonna estimate it at a couple of tablespoons worth, because you know, we love garlic in our meatballs. And then, when I'm done with this garlic, I'm gonna give you the wet bread. And I'll tell you, the first time I ever made meatballs, my wife looked at me when I had my hands in that wet bread and I was wringing it out, and she goes, what the hell are you doing? I go, I'm making meatballs. She goes, why is that bread wet? I says, listen, do you like my meatballs? I said, then go away and let me make them, please. I says, just leave me alone. I go, this is the way I make meatballs. Now, again, with the recipes, my dad, he uses all dry breadcrumbs. My mother, she doesn't use any dry breadcrumbs. She uses all wet bread. I find that all wet bread makes it a little too soft for me. I like a little consistency. Ma, not that your meatballs are mushy, but I tend to add a little dry breadcrumbs to firm them up a little bit. I love you, Ma. So, I'm gonna finish with this garlic, and then I'm gonna have you come over and I'm gonna show you what we do with that wet bread. All right, one more clove and I'm done here. And like I said, I would, if you're using, you know, minced garlic out of a jar, which it's okay, not everybody has time to do this, I would use 2 heaping tablespoons. Now, what I do when I make these meatballs is I make a triple batch. So this is 2 pounds of meat, and everything you see here is representative of making 2 pounds of meat. That'll probably get you about 25 meatballs, depending on, you know, how big you roll them. I usually make a triple batch, so I'm making, you know, 75, 80 meatballs, and I'll throw them in the bag in the freezer for later use. Because if you're gonna go through all this, you might as well make enough. All right, guys, the wet bread. 5 slices, crust cut off, in a Ziploc bag. You get a little warm water going. You fill it up. I know this is strange, but believe me, this is the way it's done. Okay, and that's it. You want to let that sit. You don't have to let it sit too long, maybe about 30 seconds. You're gonna see it absorbs a lot of water. And then, what I'll do is, I'll take the knife and I'll put some holes and I'll start draining it from the bottom. All right? And I'll squeeze out as much water as I can out of those holes, out of the top, until the bread starts coming out. You really can't get any more water out. All right? And then, what you have to do is you take a portion of it in your hands and you squeeze that water out. And that's what you get. You want to turn it around so you get the water from the inside. And you know, you're never going to get all the water. Let's get that straight. You're never going to get all the water. But you're looking for that consistency right there. And that's it. In it goes. And those 5 slices, they'll give you 2 handfuls. I normally make triple batches. If you're going to do this, I suggest you use 6 pounds of meat and triple everything that I've given you. You might be frying meatballs for a couple of hours, but you know something? You'll have 75, 80 meatballs, you have them for dinner, you put them in the freezer, and then you have them for, you know, at least a few weeks, depending on how many meatballs you eat. Okay, so there's our wet bread. Now, I'm gonna clean this up, and we're gonna get back, and we're gonna mix them. All right, guys, got our meat, got our wet bread. We're ready to mix. So, you get the half a cup of grated cheese. I'm gonna save the egg till the end. You got the half a cup of seasoned Italian breadcrumbs, half a cup of finely chopped parsley, 2 teaspoons of salt, half a teaspoon of pepper, that awesome garlic, got some leftover parsley in there. You don't want to waste the parsley now. Come on. Okay. And your egg. And unfortunately, there's no real good way to mix this except for with your hands. And I suggest you do the turn and grind. And what you have to do is, you see how that wet bread is all clumped up. You gotta grab it and unclump it as you're mixing, because the last thing you want is a big clump of wet bread in your meatball. Not good. So, you're gonna mix this. It's gonna take a minute. You know, you see you got those clumps, you gotta get rid of those clumps. See them right there? Get them in your fingers, squeeze them together, right? Blend them into the meat. Little clump on the side there, see it? Yeah. You gotta get those. You gotta make sure you get all of them. All right. You know, always do that flip to the bottom. Open it up. See that pink meat right there? That's unseasoned. You gotta break that up. You gotta break that up. You don't want to find any pink unseasoned parts of meat, because then your meatballs are uneven and they don't taste the same. These are the little things, you know. This is I tell my kids, you know, with love, That's the love. When you see that little piece of pink in there, doesn't have all the seasoning, you gotta break it up. That's the love we're talking about on Live, Laugh, and Cook Italian. All right, yeah, see, clumps. Gotta get rid of those. Again, meatballs, sizes. Some people make them the size of softballs. I could never understand it. Some people make them so small, they belong in wedding soup. I don't understand. A meatball is about that big. I mean, you know, look, still getting clumps. You see it? You see it in the meatball as I'm rolling it. Yeah, get those clumps out. Right there. That's a meatball. I have a friend, Vinny Ignoto. Vinny, I love you. His meatballs are the size of softballs. He fries them in a pan. Takes like 45 minutes before they're cooked. Sometimes after 45 minutes, they're still not cooked. Your meatball just isn't the size that you want it, but you know, you gotta be able to fry it in the olive oil so that it's crispy, but yet it's cooked on the inside. So your size, it's important because you don't want to have it get too dark on the outside and not cook on the inside. And then you don't want to have it so small that, you know, the crusts, once you bite into it, there's nothing left. So it's important, the size of your meatballs. And I usually fry, I don't know, 13, 14 at a time. So this will give me about 2 batches. Okay guys, listen, we're back early because my cousin started asking me some questions and my wife felt it might be something that you would want to know. So the first thing she asked me was about over mixing, and she says, are you worried about your meatballs getting tough because you've over mixed the meat? And the answer is no, because when you're done with these meatballs, when you're done frying them and they're cooked, they might be a little tough. The problem is, you gotta put them in the gravy once they're done. And I would say you gotta put them in a simmering gravy for at least a half hour. And you know, you'll know if you put them in there too long, it's gonna turn to mush and you're gonna make a half bolognese with meatballs in it. So, you know, there's a fine line of cooking them in the gravy, but you don't have to worry about the over mixing because once these are done, they are gonna go in the gravy and they will cook for at least another half hour where they're gonna get super soft. You can make them as soft as you want. The longer you cook them, the softer they're gonna get. Like I said, I don't suggest you cook them too long because once they break apart, you're all done. All right, and the second thing she asked me was about the scoop. And you know, if it was, she thought it was good to use like an ice cream scoop or something to get, you know, the exact amount. It's not a science. You know, over the years, you'll kind of figure out exactly how much you need in your hand. If you want to use an ice cream scoop and try to measure out every single meatball, you can. I've never done it, you know, and believe me, for years I sat with my mother rolling meatballs and she would tell me, that's too big, that's too small. She'd look at some and go, what are you doing? I'm sorry, Mom. So it's a lot of years that it takes to get, you know, the perfect meatball every time. But believe me, my mother, she schooled me on the meatballs because no meatball went unlooked at by my mother. Every meatball I rolled, she had a comment on. So Ma, thank you, because now I roll a perfect meatball. All right guys, we're ready to cook our meatballs. My oil's hot. You can see that's about a good 1/4 inch of oil in that pan. If you want it to ride up high on the meatball. And the way I test the oil, I come over here, I get a little water in my finger, I'll hit it. I see it pop like that, we're ready to put them in. I tend to like to give them a little roll right before they go in, because as they sit here on the, you see that, it's gone flat as it sits on the cutting board waiting for the oil. So I tend to give it a little roll before it goes in, just so it doesn't have that flat spot that stays around. And what I'll usually do is I'll put 10 around the outside ring. And then I'll put 3 or 4 in the middle, depending on how many I can fit. All right, there they go. I'm gonna grab a hand wash. All right. So these are gonna cook, I would say, a good 8 minutes, six to 8 minutes per side. My cousin asked me another question, and of course my wife said, this is stuff you should tell people. She came over and she looked around and she goes, when I fry stuff and saute stuff, there's splatter everywhere. Well, this really isn't sauteing. It's more like partial deep frying. You can see that, you know, a good third of the meatball is submerged in the oil. So you're really not sauteing, and you really don't get that splatter that happens when you saute in different things. Now, you zoom in there, honey. See that? That's just about done. But what I like to do, first of all, you can't grab these meatballs with a pair of tongs, okay? Because they're still too soft. If you try to move these around with a pair of tongs, you're gonna squish them to death. You can't do that. Until you flip them over, you have to deal with them with the 2 spoons, okay? See that? That's the color you need. So, pick it up on one end, roll it with the other end, roll it over. Up and over. Up and over. And the last thing you want to do is have one of these squished. Now, you see that one? Not as dark. I'm going to take this, I'm going to scoop that one into the center, put that one to the outside. Because of course, the center cooks quicker than the outside. And then once I'm done with all of them, I'll make a determination of which ones need to go in the center. All right, which this one does, right? So I'll take this one out, slide that one over, move this one in. Same thing with this one. I'll take this one, move it over, slide that one in. All right, and there we go. So now we're on our downside, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Okay. We're getting ready to give them a turn again to what I call the white side. All right, so you can see the bottom of the meatball there is done. Of course, now we're using the tongs, because once they've cooked on both sides, you're not gonna crush them. But you see they have a white side, so I'm gonna wanna flip it up on that white side. And what I'll do is, I'll get them all, because every meatball has a white side, and I'll flip them all up on that white side. And they won't cook long on this side. This is like a 2-minute side, just so you don't have that white look of the meatball there. Sometimes you gotta give them a lean, and let them lean on each other so they don't fall over. All right. There we go. Now, of course, we have our gravy simmering right there, because when these are done, they're gonna go in that gravy. And then, when I get these out, I'm gonna clean all that schmutz around the pan before I put the next batch of meatballs in. And if you're doing a triple batch like I normally do, I do 2 frying pans. So a triple batch is 75, 80 meatballs. I usually get 26, 28 per 2-pan load. I wouldn't fry any more than three rounds in 1 pan of oil. If you're gonna do 1 pan, I would change oil after the 3rd round. You'll probably find that it's broken down enough that you really don't want to use it anymore. So once you get good, you go with the 2 frying pans. It works better. All right, so these meatballs, they're done. All right, and I'm just gonna give them a shake. A little excess oil coming off of there. No sense in having that sitting at the bottom of our bowl. See, no more white. All right. And now, I like to use this thing right here. See that? I'll go around the edge, and I'll get all that. You know, the pork gives off that white stuff, whatever it is. And you see that? You don't want that in your pan for the next round of meatballs, because that will get all stuck to the bottom of them, and then they'll come off and they'll be like burnt under there. You don't want that. So, and if you feel anything that's stuck to the bottom of the pan, don't be afraid to give it a little scrape, just like that. Get all that stuck crap off of there. Right, you get it all in there. Right, yeah, you don't want that in there. So, always good to have a clean oil before you put your meatballs in. All right, and there we go. And now, of course, you can see these are even flatter because they've been sitting longer. So you got to give them another roll before you drop them in. All right, and there we go. All right, guys, our meatballs are done. I would suggest that you try one of these out of the bowl before you put them in the gravy. Because let me tell you, this is a whole new experience of meatball right here. With that crunchy outside, the soft inside. Once they go in the gravy and they cook, you've lost that. So I would suggest you try. But for these, they're all going in the gravy. And if you saw the gravy episode, you know, not looking to start any problems. Call it gravy, call it sauce, not looking to insult anyone. But you know, here, call it gravy. So, these guys are gonna go in, they're gonna cook about 25, 30 minutes, and we'll see you at the table. Okay, so here we are. We're ready to eat our meatballs and raviolis. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Live, Laugh, and Cook Italian. And like always, the recipe will be up on Facebook and Instagram. And now a toast to family and good health. Salute.
Salute.
And in Italian we say, tutti mangiare. Time to eat.